CSS rules are applied in precise orders so that you can choose exactly how rules are to be applied and when. And this is done in a number of different ways. First of all, let's have a look at this document. This is about the order of processing CSS rules. Now, first of all, looking at the creators of style sheets. The one with the most importance are those created by the author of a document, and the least importance those created by the browser. So, for example, the default rules that are set up and assigned in a web browser, they are set up right at the start, just before a page loads. Then after that, any styling that's been set up by a user, for example here, let me show you in Firefox, one of the options is you can choose your font and your font size and the colors and so on. So any options such as those created by a user, they'll be looked at next. And then lastly, all the styles that are defined in a document will be read in, and then the document will be displayed. Okay, so that's the order of style sheet creators. Next, style sheet methods. Now, I've shown you earlier inline styles, embedded and external, and here is the importance of each, or the precedence. Inline styles, where for example you include a style attribute within an element within a tag in a web page, they have the highest precedence, and the lowest precedence are external style sheets. So if you load in an external style sheet, those styles are pulled in first. Then if you have one embedded within style tags, that's looked at. And then finally, any styles that have been embedded inline within any elements, they're read in after that. So now we've gone through 6 levels of assigning styles. And then finally, each of these styles is applied in this order, where the highest preference goes to IDs, so that because IDs are specific to particular elements, they have the highest precedence. And then classes, which apply to groups of elements, have a lower precedence. And the lowest precedence of all are element tags such as you can see here, P for paragraph, B for bold, I for italic, H1 for a level 1 heading, and so on. So what happens with the rules is any that apply to elements are applied first. Then all class rules are looked up, and then they're applied. And then finally, any rules that reference IDs are applied to the document at the end. And then once all these 9 steps have been taken, then your document is going to be displayed exactly as it should be seen. Now, sometimes there can be a conflict in that you have a couple of rules where you define something, say with the color red earlier on and then later on with blue, and normally the most recent rule will override. But if for example you have something that's less specific, such as a class, where a class of something is set to blue and then you set an ID to red, that will always override. There are some more rules about how a particular rule will gain precedence over any other rule, and that's summed up here with this simple statement. In general, the fewer elements that are to be modified, the greater the precedence given to a rule. Now, this is explained in great detail in the written lecture of this section. You may find that interesting, but it is something that you'll very rarely have to deal with. Mostly you need to know what I'm telling you here, which is the more precise, or the fewer elements that has been modified, the higher a precedence a rule has, and what I'm going to tell you now, which is about the important tag, which lets you sort out any problems that you may come across anyway. For example, here we have my class, a class called my class, and here it's set to blue, and then following that my class is set to red. And what's going to happen normally without the use of this little tag there is the red will be applied to it. But let's have a look at this in the browser. So we'll take this file here and put that in the Opera browser, and as you can see, it's actually still in blue. It hasn't gone to red, and the reason for that is this important exclamation important. If you put that on a rule, you can say to it, it doesn't matter what comes afterwards, always apply this rule. So if I get rid of that and then we reload this into Opera, you can see the new rule below it of red has applied to the heading. Right, now I'd like to move on and discuss the difference between the div and span tags. Now, they were created to provide containers with which other HTML content could be placed. Why two containers, you might ask? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to show you here. Now, here's an example, div and spans.htm, which is in the section 4 directory of the downloadable archive for this course. And what we've got here is a style section of code here in which we've used a group, there you are, a group assignment, so div comma span, so any div or any span set the border to 1 pixel solid in black. And then underneath that, divs have their own rule, set the background to yellow, and spans have their rule, set the background to cyan. So what's going to happen here is any divs used will be in yellow and any spans used will be shown in cyan, and all of them will have a little black border so we can see the outline of them. So let's go and look at that in the Opera browser here. Now what I've done is, and you may want to do this if you try out the example for yourself, is I've narrowed the browser down to match about the width of this line here. Now let's look at what's going on. Here's a div tag, and as you can see, it stretches all the way to the right of the browser, regardless of how wide it is. And it's a block element, it's always going to be a rectangle. Below it there's some text which isn't contained in either a div or a span, and underneath it again, there we go, there's another div. Now moving on, here we have some text inside a span tag, and what's interesting here is that the element has stopped immediately after the end of the slash span. Let's have a look at that code here. Span, this text is inside a span tag, slash span, this isn't, and then this is again. So what happens here is a span only wraps around the contents of the element that it contains, whereas a div will go all the way to the end of the screen. So spans can be inserted in line in ordinary content, and you can apply effects that flow. Have a look at this section down here, and have a look at that as it wraps around and moves, and these spans are not rectangular. What happens is they begin and they wrap around and they flow with the text. Whereas we go back to another div underneath again, and you can see here this div will always be rectangular going to the edge of the screen, and then we have a longer span underneath, and as you can see, when it wraps, it just follows and flows with the text. Having examined the differences between divs and spans, let's now look at measurements used by CSS. So for this I have a file ready made, measurements.htm, which you can fetch from the download archive if you like, and we'll put that in the browser. There we are. Now there are a number of different measurements that you can apply, and let's look at these in turn as used by this example. So first of all, px. That stands for pixels, and that represents a single dot on the screen. Then we have point, in this case 28 point. That represents a particular size used more frequently in printing, but it's now been copied across and used in CSS. The next measurement here, inches. So here, for example, 0.39 inches. And then underneath centimeters, 1 centimeter. Obviously there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter, so 10 millimeters is the same as 1 centimeter. Then picas, another measurement more often used in printing than on screen, but you can use it with CSS. So here we have 2.37 picas, and then 2.37m, that means emphasis, standing for the comparative size. So 1m stands for the current font size, 2m is twice the current font size, and so on. Then x, this particular measurement is equivalent to the height of a lowercase x. The lowercase x is a popular unit of measurement because it's a good approximation for helping you to choose the width of a box that's going to contain some text. So if you assume your box is going to need 29 characters, if you use m's, you'll get about the right width and height to use for that box, approximately. And then here we have font size 237%. The percent is again going to be it's like m, only it's done in percentages rather than in units. So for example, 2.37m is equivalent to 237%. Now, as it happens, all of these particular values I've put here are almost exactly equal to each other. So if we look at the example web page again here, you can see they're almost the same. There's a little bit of difference here. You can see with the colons, I haven't quite got the sizes exactly right there, but it's pretty close. So you can see you have a choice. You have a wide variety of measurements that you can choose from. So whatever you're comfortable with working with, if you've come from a print background, that's fine. You can use those measurements. If you're a programmer more happy with pixels, you can use those, and so on. The choice is entirely up to you.